bobcat named Chapo, born in a conservation center and orphaned within days, was about to do something no captive-born bobcat had ever done before. From the moment he opened his eyes, the wild was calling. What began as escape attempts soon revealed a deeper truth. This bobcat wasn't meant for captivity. He wasn't just fighting walls, he was fighting fate. When the Conservation Center made the unprecedented decision to release a captive-born bobcat directly into the wild, they were gambling everything on an animal who had never hunted live prey or navigated a real forest. But what happens when an animal who has only known walls is returned to a wilderness he has never faced? What he did next wasn't just survival. It was something no one saw coming. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The air in the birthing den at the Appalachian Wildlife Conservation Center was thick with the metallic scent of new life and the musky warmth of fur. Silas Blackwood watched through a reinforced glass panel, his breath fogging a small circle on the cool surface. He was a man carved from the same ancient mountains that surrounded the center, his face a roadmap of deep lines etched by 70 years of sun, wind, and worry. He'd been the lead carnivore keeper here for 42 of those years, and his hands, though gnarled with arthritis, were still the steadiest in the state when it came to handling a tranquilizer rifle or comforting a frightened animal. Inside the den, a bobcat named Willow, herself born in captivity, had just delivered a single male kitten. He was a scrawny, squirming thing, all oversized paws and ears, his spotted coat still damp. Silas noted the birth in the logbook, his handwriting a familiar, spidery script. May 14th, 2024. 4:32. One male, healthy. Dam is attentive. But Willow's attentiveness was fleeting. A malady that had been slowly stealing her strength for months took a final vicious hold. Within a week, she was gone, leaving the tiny, unnamed kitten an orphan. The task of raising him fell to Silas and his team. They named him Chapo, a nod to the infamous escape artist, after he managed to wiggle out of 3 different warming boxes in his first month of life. "This one's got a spark," Silas would murmur, feeding the kitten with a bottle, the rough little tongue scraping against his calloused fingers. A different kind of fire. As Chapo grew, that fire intensified. He was a magnificent animal, sleek and powerful, with tufted ears that swiveled to capture the faintest sound and intelligent, pale yellow eyes that missed nothing. His enclosure was state-of-the-art, a carefully constructed diorama of a mountain forest with rock ledges, a trickling stream, and hollow logs. It was a gilded cage designed for the captive breeding program that was the last best hope for bolstering the fragile wild bobcat population in the region. The goal was simple: raise healthy, genetically diverse bobcats and, eventually, release their offspring into protected lands. Chapo, however, had not read the memo. He viewed the enclosure not as a home, but as a puzzle to be solved. He paced the perimeter for hours, his movements not the lazy shuffle of a contented captive, but the tense, fluid stride of a predator searching for a weakness in the fence line. His keepers would find him perched atop the highest rock, staring out at the hazy blue peaks of the distant mountains, a look of profound, wild longing in his gaze. His escape attempts became legendary among the staff. The first time, he used a fallen branch, left after a storm, as a ladder, managing to scale halfway up the 16-foot mesh fence before a keeper spotted him. They cleared all debris after that. A month later, he learned to unravel a small section of wire near the gate's hinge with his claws, a patient, meticulous effort that took him nearly a week. They reinforced the gate with steel plates, His most audacious attempt involved him feigning illness, lying motionless for so long that the new intern, frantic with worry, opened the enclosure door without following proper protocol. Chapo exploded into action, a tawny blur of muscle, and was only stopped by Silas's quick thinking and a well-aimed blast from a CO2 fire extinguisher that startled him back. The frustration among the zoological staff was palpable. He was a prime genetic candidate, vital to the program. But his behavior was becoming a message they could no longer ignore. "He's not just restless, Silas," said the center's director at a tense staff meeting. "He's miserable. He's telling us he doesn't belong here." Silas felt a painful knot tighten in his chest. He had raised the cat from a blind, helpless kitten. He talked to him in a low, rumbling voice during his rounds, and Chapo, unlike any other bobcat Silas had known, would often sit and listen, his head cocked as if understanding the old man's weary tone. A bond had formed, a strange, unspoken connection across the species divide. The thought of Chapo's unhappiness was a personal failure. The case eventually drew the attention of the Linking Bobcat Network, a coalition of scientists and conservationists. They sent their top field biologist, a woman who was Chapo's opposite in almost every way. Dr. Eris Thorne was in her early 30s, a whirlwind of kinetic energy, with a sharp analytical mind and a vocabulary peppered with words like viability, genetic bottleneck, and reintroduction protocols. She saw animals not as individuals, but as data points in a grand ecological equation. She and Silas clashed from the moment she arrived. "His stress behaviors are off the charts," she said, her eyes glued to a tablet displaying Chapo's cortisol levels. "Pacing, fence running, lack of grooming. He's a classic case of zoochosis. From a purely scientific standpoint, his suitability for a captive breeding program is zero." "I've known this cat since he was an hour old," Silas countered, his voice rough. "He's more than a data point, Doctor. He has a personality, a spirit. A spirit that is being crushed by captivity," she retorted, not unkindly. "Keeper Blackwood, your affection for him is obvious, but it might be blinding you. The greatest act of care we can offer this specific animal is to listen to what he's so desperately trying to tell us." Over the next month, Eris and her team conducted a rigorous evaluation. They observed Chapo from hidden cameras, documenting every twitch of his ears, every frustrated chuff. Silas watched alongside them, his heart sinking with every piece of evidence that mounted in Eris's favor. He saw the intelligence in Chapo's eyes as the bobcat studied the electric fence, learning its rhythmic pulse. He saw the raw, athletic power in his limbs as he leaped from rock to rock. He saw an animal whose instincts were not just intact, they were screaming for release. The decision was made. Chapo was deemed unsuitable for life in captivity. He would be the first captive-born bobcat in the program to be considered for direct release into the wild. It was a huge gamble. He had never hunted live prey, never navigated a true forest, never faced a rival predator. The first step was to move him to a massive multi-acre pre-release enclosure deep in the center's protected lands, far from the public eye. Human contact was cut to an absolute minimum. Silas was devastated. His daily ritual of talking to Chapo was over. Now he could only watch on a grainy monitor as the animal he'd raised was systematically retaught how to be wild. The transformation was astonishing. The keepers began introducing live prey, first rabbits, then squirrels. Chapo's initial hesitation gave way to a lethal, instinctive grace. The clumsy, hand-reared kitten was gone, replaced by a silent, efficient hunter. He learned the whisper of the wind in the pines, the scent of rain on dry earth. His pacing stopped. He moved with a newfound purpose, his muscles coiling and releasing with the fluid power of his ancestors. Silas watched the monitor in the quiet observation hut, a thermos of lukewarm coffee in his hand. He felt a profound sense of loss, a hollow ache in his soul. The bobcat that would sometimes look for him, that would meet his gaze across the enclosure, was vanishing. But in his place, something magnificent was being born. He was watching nature reclaim its own. He realized Eris had been right. The greatest act of care was letting go. One crisp October morning, 2 weeks later, the time came. Eris and her team, along with a reluctant Silas, sedated Chapo one last time. He lay on the steel table, a wild creature feigning sleep. Eris worked quickly and professionally, fitting a lightweight GPS collar around his thick neck. Silas reached out, his hand hovering for a moment over the bobcat's flank, feeling the warmth of the life beneath the fur. He didn't touch him. It felt like a line he shouldn't cross. The journey to the release site in the Nantahala National Forest was silent and somber. They drove for hours, climbing higher into the mountains, the air growing thin and cool. They chose a remote valley, a riot of autumn color, with a clear stream and dense undergrowth, a perfect bobcat habitat. They placed the transport crate on the ground, the metal door facing a thicket of rhododendron. Silas's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. 42 years of raising, healing, and caring for captive animals, and it all came down to this moment of opening a door and walking away. Eris looked at him. "Do you want to do it?" she asked softly. Silas nodded, his throat too tight for words. He knelt and slowly, carefully, unlatched the gate. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a tufted ear appeared, followed by a whiskered nose testing the air. Chapo stepped out of the crate, not with a panicked bolt, but with a deliberate, regal calm. He stood for a heartbeat, a ghost in the morning sun, his yellow eyes scanning the vast, untamed world that was finally his. He gave the humans one last, lingering, unreadable glance. Then, without a sound, he turned and melted into the undergrowth. One moment he was there, a solid, living presence. The next, he was gone. Silence descended on the valley, broken only by the sigh of the wind. A tear, hot and unexpected, traced a path through the weathered landscape of Silas's cheek. Eris placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It was a bittersweet triumph," he said to her, his voice hoarse. "The end of our connection, but the beginning of his true life." In the months that followed, Chapo's story became a symbol of the rewilding movement. His GPS collar sent back regular pings, painting a map of a life lived on its own terms. He established a vast territory, navigating the rugged terrain with an uncanny expertise that defied his captive origins. The data he provided was invaluable, showing how a captive-born animal could adapt and thrive. Other bobcats, Nova and Luna, released in a different part of the forest, were also being tracked, their intersecting paths weaving a new hope for a breeding population in the region. With wild bobcat numbers hovering at only a few hundred, every individual mattered. Silas retired that winter. He bought a small cabin not far from the national forest boundary, trading the scent of disinfectant and animal feed for the smell of pine and wood smoke. He followed Chapo's progress obsessively, checking the public tracking website that Eris's team maintained. He saw the blinking dot that was Chapo move with the seasons, a silent testament to his survival. Then, one day in late spring, the unthinkable happened. Chapo's signal stopped. For 3 days, the dot on the map remained frozen in a steep, inaccessible ravine. The protocol was to wait, as collars could sometimes temporarily malfunction. But Silas knew. He felt a cold dread creep into his bones, the same dread he'd felt when he found Chapo's mother, Willow, still and lifeless in her den. He called Eris. "Something's wrong," he said, his voice tight. "He hasn't moved. It's not like him. We're giving it another 24 hours, Silas." Eris's voice was strained. "It's rough country. He could have just shed the collar. It happens." "I'm going in," Silas stated, not asking for permission. He was too old for this. His knees ached and his lungs burned in the thin mountain air, but he didn't care. He packed a small bag and, using the last known coordinates, set off at dawn. Eris, knowing she couldn't stop him, met him at the trailhead with 2 of her sturdiest interns and a kit of emergency supplies. It took them the better part of a day to hike into the ravine. The terrain was brutal, a tangle of fallen logs and thorny briars. Just as the sun began to dip below the ridge, casting long purple shadows, Eris's handheld receiver let out a series of sharp beeps. "We're close," she whispered. "The collar's signal is strong." They found it lying at the base of a rocky overhang, near the entrance to a shallow cave. The leather was chewed through, the expensive electronics discarded like a piece of trash. Silas's heart plummeted. A predator could have done this. A bear or a poacher. He knelt, his old joints protesting, and picked up the collar. It felt cold and inert in his hands. This was it, the end of the story. A failed experiment. Then, from the darkness of the cave, came a sound. It wasn't a growl of aggression, but a low, soft chuff. Eris froze, holding up a hand for silence. Silas's gaze locked onto the shadows. Slowly, a familiar shape emerged. It was Chapo. He was leaner, scarred, and his eyes held a wary, feral intelligence that had never been there at the center. He looked at the humans, not with fear, but with a calm authority. He was the king of this domain. He took a step aside, revealing what he had been guarding. There, blinking in the fading light, was another bobcat. Silas recognized her from the photos. It was Luna, one of the other released cats. And huddled against her flank, tumbling over each other with clumsy paws, were 3 tiny spotted kittens. The air left Silas's lungs in a rush. No one moved. The humans and the bobcats stared at each other across an invisible divide. Chapo, the orphan born in a sterile den, the restless spirit who refused to live in a cage, had done more than just survive. He had found a mate, and in the heart of the wild, he had started a family. He had not only rejoined nature, he was actively rebuilding it. This was the unthinkable act. Not an escape, not a disappearance, but a profound, miraculous success. It was the ultimate validation of their gamble. A living, breathing symbol of hope for his entire species. A slow smile spread across Silas's face, cracking the weary grief that had settled there. He looked at Eris, whose analytical composure had dissolved into pure, unadulterated awe. Her eyes were glistening. Chapo held their gaze for a moment longer, then let out another soft chuff and turned, nudging one of his kittens before disappearing back into the protective darkness of the den with his family. He didn't need them anymore. He was home. Silas stood up, the discarded collar still in his hand. He felt no sense of loss now, only a deep, abiding peace. He had raised a kitten, but he had released a king. And in doing so, he had helped give the wild mountains back a piece of their soul.